Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. We're back today with two more of the Democratic candidates for Ingham County Prosecutor who will be on the ballot in the primary election on August 2nd. And first up with us today is Thomas English. Mr. English, welcome to City Pulse.
Thank you, Burl. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your background because it really is very interesting. You come to us via New Mexico, where you grew up, but you were a cabinet secretary there.
Yes.
And now you want to run for prosecutor. But your background is related, at least. Tell us about what you did out there.
Well, I was a state police officer in New Mexico. I also was a homicide investigator for the state police. That's when I decided that I would put myself through college and through law school, working second shift. After law school, I became a federal prosecutor for 12 and a half years. I enjoyed that very much.
So a U.S. attorney.
A assistant U.S. attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I left there when Gary Johnson, who's now the Libertarian candidate for president, asked me to become a cabinet secretary and run the state police. I worked with Governor Johnson. I enjoyed his attitudes on drugs, on asset forfeiture seizures, and things that I think are very important to our community.
Now, his attitude on drugs is interesting. I interviewed him not long ago on City Pulse's radio show, and he's a libertarian, and so maybe you should say what you mean by his liking his attitude on drugs.
I fought the war on drugs for 12 and a half years on the front lines. I was the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force Chief in New Mexico. Governor Johnson's attitude was that drug addiction is a medical problem. It's not necessarily a legal problem. He advocates the legalization of marijuana, and he does not favor seizure of assets and forfeiture, and believes there's a lot of abuses in that area. He's advocated this for a number of years, even a couple of decades, in the face of a lot of opposition, and I think that he has been shown correct. And when he asked me to come on board, I did so fully endorsing what he said. Drug addiction is a medical problem. People need medical assistance. If we get those people medical assistance, then we can find out from them how the drugs are getting into our community. I don't believe that arresting or incarcerating your way out of this problem is ever going to work, and I don't believe it ever has worked. I think that it is important that we understand that the grip that addiction has on these people. And it's difficult at times to get law enforcement officers, whom I worked with and came up through the ranks with, to understand that addicts need treatment. You can't just tell them, stop using drugs. And for instance, in a large case that I did in New Mexico, a violent gang prosecution, I had to convince the FBI that it was in the FBI's interest to pay for drug treatment, which was difficult but successful. And I think they learned also the success of the case, that by treating drug addicts first, you can get a lot further in your investigation.
But now, drug addicts, I agree, they're addicts first, but they do commit crimes in some cases. And so where do you draw that line?
Well, I don't think it's a line that's necessarily drawn. You treat the drug addiction so that you know what's going on there. I think any underlying criminality, if they're supporting their drug habit through burglaries or theft or fraud, those have to be treated by the system. I do believe that any criminal act has to have the attention of the system. It's referred to as the broken window theory of crime reduction that's been utilized successfully across the United States. And no matter how minor of a crime, an individual has to know there's consequences to that crime. It doesn't mean jail or prison, but it also means the system's not going to just skip over you because you're only committing minor crimes. There's a lot of other diversion programs, either before the courts or through the courts. A lot of our circuit and district court judges are doing a great job with specialty courts. But we have to address these crimes early and often and not wait until someone is a violent criminal and then say, oh, now we'll pay attention to you, because one, we've created a victim of crime unnecessarily, and also we have in essence condemned an individual to continue on their path of crime until they become violent, when maybe we could have stopped it earlier. Not all, but some, and that's important.
A thorny problem in Ingham County is medical marijuana dispensaries. We have in the city of Lansing 60, 70, some people say more than that. They're all, according to the courts, the state courts, illegal, and yet they continue to operate. We don't have any new ones because the city now has a moratorium on it while they try to figure this out. But meanwhile, they operate, and I'm curious, isn't there a point at which you have to say, there is a law here. This has to be enforced, Your Honor. You're talking about the mayor, who clearly doesn't have his police investigating these things. What's a prosecutor to do in a case like that?
Well, Burl, I think it's really important for the prosecuting attorney to be a leader in the community. The prosecuting attorney needs to look at not only the law that we have and the decisions of the courts. You have to speak to the county because the voters elect you, and you're the voice of those voters. Those voters come out and want a prosecuting attorney who will stand up and bring people to the table and discuss this issue. And the issue is really thornier than I think even you described, because the voters approved medical marijuana.
Right.
We are a democracy. We have a poorly written law on medical marijuana, and being a disability judge for in the United States system, hearing 4,000 to 5,000 cases, I've heard an awful lot about medical marijuana. There's certainly an issue of not only how many dispensaries and what they're allowed to sell and what they're allowed to grow. The other problem is you have a lot of medical practitioners who are overprescribing. And so a lot of people are getting medical marijuana cards that is only remotely related to some medical condition. Well, that needs to be looked at on behalf of the citizens to make sure that first we're doing what the citizens voted for and not letting it grow beyond that. Also, I think the municipalities, the townships, have an obligation to pass regulations to talk to these dispensaries about what will work in their communities. When you don't address this through regulation, you're creating a vacuum. And we see what a vacuum gets us. 60 some odd medical marijuana dispensaries in areas that, quite frankly, a lot of citizens are also upset about how open and in the great number that they are. I believe the prosecuting attorney in this issue and many other issues has to do what the statute says, and that's be the lead law enforcement officer for the county and to bring people to the table. The prosecutor has the power to prosecute or not prosecute. That's a mighty tool when you're getting people to talk.
Would this problem be solved if the voters simply said it should be legal? It doesn't matter if it's medical or not.
Well, I think that's definitely the trend where it's going.
Good solution?
I don't.
You think?
I think it's up to the voters to decide what they want. I have no. I think again, Governor Johnson was right when he said that many years ago. Colorado, Washington State have legalized recreational marijuana. There aren't terrible things happening there. My only caveat that I have, and I had this when I worked for Governor Johnson, was we need a reliable test for a level of intoxication or inebriation on marijuana for impaired drivers. That is an important step. And quite frankly, I don't think science has been real good with us on getting us an answer to that. But I think we also need to pay attention to that because, quite frankly, I think that's where we're going.
Uh, the word on the street is that Carol Seaman is leading the leading candidate for the Democratic nomination. Certainly a well-respected figure in our community. Why would you be a better Ingham County prosecutor?
Well, I think it comes down to leadership. Leadership takes credibility, and I think Carol's a credible person, don't get me wrong. But I have achievements. I've done things. I've been out in the world and in the nation and in the streets. So it's not just words or studies or committees. It's actual working in the streets and working with people, trying cases, investigating cases, solving real world problems. Ingham County needs a leader, needs someone who's going to stand up and bring parties together to understand what's going on in our county. We have the medical marijuana issue, we have the heroin and opiate abuse issues, we have sexual assault, which is a huge issue. And quite frankly, some of the history of sexual crime prosecution in Ingham County is not that good. And when you look back and think how laws were utilized to harass homosexual individuals, it isn't a good path that this county has been on. And it's time for someone new, someone different to step up, bring new ideas to the table, instead of just keep reinvesting in the old ideas, which haven't left us in a very good place.
We've got a couple of minutes to go. I'd like to find out a little more about you. I know you are a bronze medal recipient, and why did you earn that?
Well, I received the Bronze Star in Afghanistan for my services to General Petraeus and also in overseeing the detention operations from the legal viewpoint. In other words, we had 2,000 to 3,000 individuals held under the rubric of the war on terror. Most came from Afghanistan, some didn't. But I had to sort through and make sure that we were following U.S. policy and also international law, which is very important because the United States needs its international partners. The United States needed to be transparent. President Obama said transparency was very important, and that was followed in Afghanistan. It was a difficult situation that took a lot of work, a lot of problem solving. At the same time, when people are shooting rockets at you and otherwise, you have to learn to work around those problems. Getting Afghan judges to go to work in a justice center that we got started was difficult because they were threatened the entire way that they would come up. Getting anybody to even drill a water well for our justice center when the first crew got blown up by a roadside bomb. Those are different circumstances, and because I successfully navigated those circumstances, I believe that they approved a Bronze Star for my service.
And what brought you to Michigan?
I came to Michigan 12 years ago when I was appointed as a United States Administrative Law Judge. My first visit here, I pulled into Williamston, and I thought, this is the quaint small town I've always wanted to live in my entire life. And people ask me many times why I haven't gone back to New Mexico, which I've been offered many times to go back. I love the water, the grass, and the trees, and the people. This is a beautiful place to live. My wife and I met my wife here. She's been here 30 years. We decided that this is where we want to live. And I've been here for 12 years myself. We're not moving. We're staying right here in Ingham County. I want to help my county and my community do a much better job for the citizens.
All right, we'll call a halt to it right there. Thomas English, thanks so much for being on the program. And Thomas English is one of the 4 Democratic candidates for Ingham County prosecutor who will be on the ballot August 2nd. And joining us now is another candidate for Ingham County prosecutor who will be on the August 2nd ballot in the Democratic primary. He is Brian Jackson. Mr. Jackson, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're welcome. I would like to find out more about you. I know you're a criminal attorney now, but you have also served as a prosecutor in Ingham County and an assistant city attorney here in Lansing. Where'd you grow up?
Lansing, I just want to correct you. I was an assistant prosecutor in Eaton County.
I'm sorry, what did I said Ingham? I apologize. Yeah.
No problem.
Thank you.
I'm from Lansing. I went to Sexton High School. Lived here most of my life, absent the 10 years that I went to college and earned my master's in law degree.
An athlete along the way?
Yep, absolutely. That was, I was big into athletics in high school and in college. Football, track, basketball, swimming.
Where'd you go for undergraduate?
Western Michigan.
Western, yeah. Yeah, that's great. So tell me what motivated you to get into the law?
Into the law, that's a good question. There's a lot of reasons, but one thing is that my mom told me you got to have a backup plan. So my whole thing is I wanted to be an athlete, and then once I realized, that's not a great goal only because of the unlikelihood of making it to the professional ranks, I thought maybe I could be an agent, or maybe I could be in a profession that really you could do so many different things in, and that's what an attorney does. There's so many areas of law to get into.
Yeah, and why did you select this area? On one side or the other, you're dealing with criminals.
Absolutely. Criminal law, ultimately I found was the most interesting, and it kind of hits closest to home, being that I come from a background of all types of different kind of people, as far as people that have committed crimes, people that have been victims of crimes. I always read about it, hear about it. It's kind of it's just a part of our society, and I wanted to better understand criminology and crime and causes and effects, and that's one reason why I chose criminology as my master's and earned a degree in that.
What do you think is at the root of why people become criminals?
Well, that's a great loaded question, because we could talk about different aspects of that for a day each,
Right.
but ultimately I think that concentrated poverty is one major reason. When you have concentrated poverty, you have a shifting of normative behavior. So what's acceptable to some people who later or do engage in crime is not acceptable to mainstream society, and there's just that difference that isn't usually overcame. But there's many reasons, of course.
And so as you have dealt with criminals on both sides, I'm sure some are likable, some aren't likable, but do you find that that the court system treats them equally?
No, I can't say that the court system treats people equally, and that's only because of the statistics and data that's available to everyone. It's not a secret that poor people, black people, brown people, other racial minorities are disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, and that's at every level, from the stops on the street to the decision to arrest, the decision to prosecute with what charges, conviction rates, sentencing lengths, the parole, whether someone's going to be paroled or not, and even violation and revocation of parole status.
How would that, if you got elected Ingham County prosecutor, how would that influence you?
It would be in the back of my mind or in the front of my mind at all times. One thing that we would have to do is be aware that it exists and acknowledge that there is systemic flaws in the system. So once myself and staff and the court in Ingham County realize that the problem exists, which I think people know, then we can move forward. And I could go into some of my ideas, but basically I would want to bring in less people through the formal criminal justice setting, especially distinguish between nonviolent offenders and violent offenders, and have an opportunity for some of the nonviolent offenders to take an alternative route, alternatives to incarceration, restorative justice diversion program, and invest in the community, invest in him or herself so that he or she is less likely to reoffend and more likely to be a member of society and have a mainstream and working position.
That's an approach that sounds good, but then there's the money question. Do you think society could be convinced that we really need to do it that way?
Absolutely, for a few reasons. You mentioned money, and ultimately I think that my ideas would save the county and the taxpayer money, because it would be less people formally prosecuted and less convictions. That frees up assistant prosecutors and other personnel to work on other resolutions. So people will be convinced once they see that it saves money, but also people will be convinced once the crime rates and reoffending rates, recidivism rates drop. Because I ultimately think that when you address offenders' needs, and again, it's not just any offender. We have to establish a criteria and distinguish between nonviolent offenders who there's a ability to rehabilitate versus violent, repeat, habitual offenders who victimize young people or other vulnerable adults. Those people will most likely have to take the traditional crime and punishment track.
Stuart Dunnings is being charged with 15 counts related to prostitution. Of course, he gets his day in court, but a lot of damage has been done regardless to the prosecutor's office. If you get elected, how would you address this concern?
Thank you. And first, I don't personally, and I hope that the Ingham County residents don't necessarily associate the people in the office and what Mr. Dunnings may or may not have done as one big equation, because I believe that the assistant prosecutors and other staff in the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office had no type of knowledge or involvement in Mr. Dunning's personal life. But what I would do is piggyback off of what Gretchen Whitmer is doing as far as rebuilding the trust, and I think that it can only be rebuilt kind of one step, one day at a time through actual action and not so much talking about it. So,
of course, Gretchen, the former senator, will serve as the interim prosecutor for the rest of the year. The skeptic in me really wonders if after 20 years in office, somebody didn't know what he was up to. Do you find it believable?
yeah, I do find that believable. I have no reason to think otherwise. And you know, I don't want to speculate on what was going on, because I only know what I've read and heard in the press. So,
and of course, if you are elected, while you would not be prosecuting him, since that's been moved out of the county, there is a certain value of neutrality. So I understand the sensitivity of this issue. Let's talk about a couple of drug-related issues in Ingham County. Like most communities, is facing this epidemic of opioid use and the consequent heroin use. What's the role of the prosecutor in trying to deal with that?
that's a good question, and the role is involved. The prosecutor has to distinguish and use his or her discretion as far as who to bring formal charges to and who to convict, and kind of even sets the parameters for what the punishment or rehabilitation should be. And my philosophy would be that people addicted to drugs should be treated more medically than criminally. And when we just address the symptoms of drug addiction, being not only drug use and possession, but also a lot of times larceny, theft, property crimes are related to that, we don't address the cause. So I would want to, as prosecutor, partner with health departments and other medical and health fields in the area to try to come up with a solution that addresses the cause and actually works towards rehabilitation rather than incarceration and criminal sanctions.
Another drug issue in Ingham County, really in the city of Lansing, is the proliferation of medical marijuana dispensaries. And the former prosecutor, Mr. Dunnings, thought they should be shut down, but he didn't shut them down, and I gather that's because the city of Lansing didn't investigate them and bring him evidence to shut them down. Isn't there a disconnect here? And I don't say this as somebody who advocates shutting them down, but that on the one hand we have the state courts saying these are illegal. On the other hand, we have them flourishing in the city of Lansing. Isn't there? It's like flaunting the law, isn't it?
Absolutely, and there's a federal question too. If that's a polarizing topic. There's people that are completely for medical use and dispensaries, and then there's a lot of people who are completely against it. As prosecutor, it would be my job to uphold the law with discretion.
But how do you uphold it if the police aren't investigating?
Well, that's a good question. It would, and when I talk to people, because I talk to people every day when I'm knocking on doors and meeting citizens, and I'm kind of gauging the feeling, and again, it's very polarizing. So I would want to continue to learn what the community wants, and ultimately, if the need comes, there could be a task force, but really we prosecute cases that we receive through investigations of police agencies, so it's still up to the investigating agency to bring a case, and it's up to the prosecutor to decide whether or not to charge it.
We've heard, getting back, if we could, to the damage the Stuart Dunning situation has done to the office. You know, we hear talk from candidates about, well, we've got to restore the integrity of the office. But how do you do that?
Thank you. Every day, just with actions. And I'm not one to believe that just talking about restoring integrity will do the trick. I think that whoever's in there has to work from day one to develop and rebuild the relationship with the community. And I think my background and track record as being a community person is at least a good starting base and foundation to build continued trust from there. But
go ahead. Sorry.
It would just be every day, one day at a time.
Before we let you go, the prosecutor is, of course, somebody who might occasionally go to court, but you're really an administrator in a lot of ways. What's your experience?
Thank you. I've been an athlete all my life, so that's teamwork. I've been a coach. I'm currently coaching at Sexton for football and track. So we manage people and deal with personalities and put together winning plans. I've been a Shabazz school board. I'm on the Shabazz school board now, which deals with budget problems because they have some problems and other types of finance.
So you've got some background going for you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but Brian Jackson, thank you so much for being on City Pulse.
Thank you.
That is our show for today. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.